Buenos días. Vamos a seguir con el Congreso, o mejor dicho, en realidad, a partir de este momento, a empezar con el Congreso realmente académico, con la faceta más académica. Y para variar, como buen Congreso, yo diría que tendremos una buena noticia y una mala noticia. La buena es que vamos a empezar, en realidad, con una situación de cierta puntualidad, y la mala es que esa puntualidad, naturalmente, se ha alterado, como suele ocurrir en las inauguraciones, y mucho más con algunos cambios de última hora, que no serán además los últimos, y que en todo caso anunciaremos con la debida antelación para que no se produzcan los lógicos despistes. Comienzo presentándome. Algunos ya me conocen, otros no. Mi nombre es Joaquín Ibáñez y soy, junto con mis compañeros Darío Gazapo de Aguilera y Miguel Ángel Aníbarro, parte de la organización, de la comisión organizadora de este Congreso. Nos ha tocado una parte quizá más espectacular que a otros compañeros, de ser los coordinadores dentro de esta propia organización. Lo primero que quiero hacer con ello es agradecerles y rogarles disculpas por adelantado por las cuestiones de deficiencia organizativa, que por mucho que nos disculpe el director de la escuela, cosa que le agradecemos, siempre también serán responsabilidad nuestra, qué duda cabe. En todo caso, esperamos que el Congreso, como así hemos querido hacerlo, y en ese sentido hablo también en nombre de un entusiasta grupo de alumnos y alumnas de doctorado que van a identificar ustedes con una cinta amarilla estos días y que están a su disposición para ayudarles en lo que sea, en lo que haga falta. En nombre de todos ellos, pues deseamos colaborar con todo el Congreso para que su consecuencia fundamentalmente investigadora y científica se lleve a cabo con la mayor de las excelencias y eficacias. Sin extender mucho ahora, les quería adelantar o comentar algo de programa. Los primeros son los cambios. Muy lamentablemente, nuestro catedrático de esta escuela, Juan Navarro Valdevej, ayer a última hora le surgió un problema profesional que le ha impedido estar, como le hubiera deseado, con nosotros esta mañana. Esto tiene siempre el lado positivo y el lado negativo. Nos va a permitir algunas flexibilidades mayores y, sobre todo, nos va a permitir que el profesor Peter Latz y el profesor Simón Marchand, que nos acompañan en la mesa y que intervendrán a continuación, como estaba previsto, dispongan también de mayor tiempo en su exposición. Les quiero pedir que a la 1 menos cuarto, a las 13:45, se dispongan ustedes con la mayor de las flexibilidades y agilidades a moverse a la zona de comida, que va a ser fuera de esta escuela. Hay que salir por la puerta principal. Nos moveremos, les acompañarán también y les indicarán entre la gente de organización. Nos moveremos al Museo Nacional del Traje. La comida, los días de la escuela, va a ser siempre en el Museo Nacional del Traje. Tenemos para ello 1 hora y media, que está prevista en el programa, pero como tenemos que movernos, les rogaría que salgamos un cuarto de hora antes. Yo intentaré a los miembros de la mesa avisarles para que sean disciplinados en este aspecto. Segundo asunto, a las 3:30, si no me equivoco, a las 3:30 se inician las 6 mesas simultáneas previstas en el programa, como está previsto todos los días. Ese núcleo es seguramente una parte del programa que apreciamos particularmente los miembros que de esta escuela hemos estado vinculados al comité organizador, la parte que nos parece realmente sustancial como escuela universitaria. Y por ello también le rogamos la máxima puntualidad. A los que sean responsables de las mesas de hoy, también les pediremos que se acerquen 10 minutos antes, un cuarto de hora antes o un poco antes, a esta sala que está aquí pegado, vecino al salón de actos, donde está la secretaría, para problemas organizativos, de coordinación que puedan haber surgido. Pero a las 3:30 nos gustaría empezar las mesas temáticas previstas. Estas mesas temáticas respetan su horario y son simultáneas. están indicadas en un planito que tienen ustedes con la bolsa que se les ha entregado de información y lo que son abiertas, de tal manera que dentro del protocolo que el relator de las mesas y el presidente de cada mesa establezca al principio de ella, su debate es un debate científico y abierto, del cual esperamos obtener siempre unas interesantes conclusiones. Y finalmente, el programa de hoy acaba, como estaba previsto, a las 8:30 con una, yo creo que una espléndida exposición que de una manera generosa la Casa de Velázquez, una institución de la que es responsable el gobierno francés, que son vecinos nuestros, también en esta misma calle, está inmediato también a la Escuela de Arquitectura. A las 8:30 inauguraremos una exposición sobre situaciones de arte contemporáneo respecto del paisaje. Es una exposición muy hermosa de diálogos entre muchos medios de las disciplinas de arte contemporáneo, entre becarios de la propia Casa de Velázquez, que es un centro de posgraduados del gobierno francés, y diversos invitados, artistas, arquitectos, fotógrafos que se han incorporado a esa exposición. Es un acto para acabar el día con un vino español, con algunas cuestiones un poco de estar de todos agradablemente y sobre todo perfectamente acogidos y respondiendo a esa amable invitación que nos ha hecho la Casa de Velázquez. Están todos ustedes obviamente invitados, naturalmente, y en un momento determinado, que creo que es, no recuerdo en el programa, si es a las 8:30, ustedes lo tienen en el programa, hay unos autobuses a la puerta de la Casa de Velázquez para facilitar la subida a Madrid capital, a la zona de Moncloa, donde ustedes ya se pueden distribuir con los servicios habituales de taxis, metros y transporte público que tiene cualquier ciudad. Ese es el programa de hoy, en el que creo que no me olvido nada sustancial. Un asunto que sí que quiero recordarles es que mañana tenemos un día complicado, un día que tiene todo lo atractivo de su complicación también. Respondiendo a la colaboración y al patrocinio del Ayuntamiento de Aranjuez, mañana nos vamos a desplazar todo el Congreso a Aranjuez. Aranjuez ya se ha explicado, creo que esta mañana, es la primera ciudad patrimonio cultural declarada en España por la UNESCO. Es una ciudad de un alto valor paisajístico y patrimonial, muy cercana a Madrid en realidad, y que además concita un aspecto patrimonial industrial también interesante, que es la primera ciudad que tuvo ferrocarril en España, desde Madrid. En realidad no en España, sino en la península ibérica. Digo esto porque el primer ferrocarril español realmente se construyó en Cuba, en la isla de Cuba, que en aquel momento todavía era provincia española. Pero el primer ferrocarril se construye entonces en la península y es el que mañana, de alguna manera, vamos a seguir simbólicamente su trazado en un desplazamiento que haremos todos en un ferrocarril especial desde la estación de Atocha. La estación de Atocha es una estación muy complicada, grande, como se pueden imaginar. En el área de cercanías hay un espacio de meeting point donde habrá azafatas e información para facilitarles el que puedan acceder a ella. Lleven, por favor, siempre las acreditaciones encima para cualquier problema. Y ahí les esperamos entre 8:30 y 9 menos cuarto, 9 menos 10, para meternos todos ya, subir al ferrocarril, al tren especial que tenemos y ponernos en marcha hacia Aranjuez. La vuelta será más sencilla, pero también será un tren especial por la noche desde Aranjuez hacia Madrid. En Aranjuez estamos esencialmente en manos del Ayuntamiento y de su organización, y el Congreso va a seguir su programa como estaba previsto. No recuerdo si hay alguna cosa importante. Tengo, por cierto, a mi derecha a una de las personas que más ha colaborado en este proyecto, que quiero también presentársela, Ainhoa Díez, que ha coordinado con otras compañeras, jóvenes arquitectas, la buena eficacia y el esfuerzo que se ha hecho por parte de esta escuela para que el Congreso, como les digo, sea relevante, útil y cómodo para todos ustedes. Sin más, voy entonces a ceder ya la palabra a nuestro invitado primero, que es don Simón Marchán, que me acompaña en la mesa a mi extrema izquierda. El profesor Simón Marchán es académico de la Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, de España. Es doctor, es catedrático de la universidad a distancia y, sobre todo, me importaría recalcarlo, que quizá sea un mérito más afectivo que académico, ha sido antiguo profesor y querido profesor de algunos, como yo mismo, en esta escuela hace muchos años. Es una persona muy querida en esta escuela. Él, a partir de este momento, va a comandar académicamente el resto de la mañana. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Agradezco a la organización la invitación que me ha cursado y agradezco también a su director, antiguo alumno y antiguo compañero en las clases de estética de esta facultad durante algunos años. Es decir, que siempre que vengo aquí, siempre me brota una emoción. Antes que nada me brota una emoción personal, afectiva y, naturalmente, una pasión intelectual. Intentaré corresponder a ambas. Voy a presentar a continuación al profesor Peter Latz, arquitecto, paisajista y urbanista independiente desde 1968. Participa en numerosos equipos de trabajo multidisciplinares con diferentes especializaciones, no solo arquitectos, sino también sociólogos, economistas de planificación urbanística y de tecnologías alternativas, de eso que se llama en la actualidad la renaturalización, entre otras cosas. Diplomado por la Universidad Técnica de Múnich en 1964, cursa estudios en distintas universidades alemanas y escuelas superiores, técnicas superiores, particularmente en la de Aachen, es decir, Aquisgrán, también es profesor en academias de arquitectura, sobre todo en la de Maastricht, en primer lugar, y la de Ámsterdam. Desde 1973 ya ejerce como profesor de arquitectura en Kassel, época en la que se involucra en diversos proyectos de investigación relacionados con las nuevas tecnologías. Y desde 1983 ejerce también como profesor de arquitectura y planeamiento del paisaje en la Facultad Weihenstephan de la Escuela Superior, Técnica Superior de Múnich. Actualmente da clases y ponencias a nivel internacional y es profesor adjunto en las universidades de Pensilvania, en Filadelfia, e invitado en Harvard. Pero interesa recalcar que el profesor Latz, junto a este currículum académico, ha participado en numerosos proyectos que tienen que ver con los paisajes de cultura e incluso que ha recibido algunos reconocimientos y premios muy importantes, entre ellos uno por el proyecto en el Riverport Island Park Saarbrücken. Saarbrücken es una ciudad alemana muy cerca de Francia, en una situación geográfica muy peculiar desde el punto de vista geográfico. El primer premio de arquitectura o Europeo de Arquitectura de Paisaje Rosa Barba, con el proyecto de Parque Duisburg Nord. Como sabemos, el Parque Duisburg Nord es el eje, el epicentro de todas las intervenciones de parques paisajísticos que están reestructurando la región del Ruhr en Alemania, encima de Norte Rhein-Westfalen, encima de Colonia. Es posiblemente, como bien se sabe ya, una de las intervenciones a nivel mundial más llamativas, precisamente en uno de los ámbitos en los que creo que insistirá este Congreso reiteradamente, cuáles son aquellos paisajes de las ruinas postindustriales. Este es un planteamiento que me parece sumamente importante, dado que se reproduce a escala mundial a ambos lados del Atlántico y particularmente en España, en zonas tan conflictivas, tan conocidas, como puede ser, lógicamente, Asturias o el País Vasco o Barcelona, Cataluña en general. Entonces, este ejemplo, me parece a mí, esta intervención del profesor Latz en Duisburg Nord es uno de los modelos inevitables o puntos de referencia que invocamos de continuo en el debate contemporáneo al respecto. Asimismo, ha recibido también la gran medalla de urbanismo, no sé a qué se refiere, una francesa, Play and Leisure, el año 2004, o premios internacionales de diseño de iluminación, mención especial de una organización neoyorquina, en colaboración con el Farre Lighting Design y la Arquitectura más Tecnología de Frankfurt. Es decir, todas aquellas organizaciones vinculadas a estos problemas paisajísticos vinculados además a las nuevas tecnologías. Porque yo creo que uno de los campos que está también de actualidad y que creo que se refleja en algunos trabajos del profesor Latz, aunque no conozco mucho de ellos, pero sí lo suficiente, es la alianza entre paisajismo y nuevas tecnologías en estos procesos de renaturalización, que son unos procesos complejos desde el punto de vista tecnológico, informáticos, etcétera, y sobre los cuales sospecho que nos hablará a continuación. Por último, alguno de estos premios se ha recibido en colaboración con Herzog y Partner Architects. Nada más y doy la palabra al profesor Latz.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Mr. President, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm greatly honored to be here and to speak to you. And since yesterday, I know that it is a very interesting conference. How can you hear it? No. It's okay. Is it okay? Is it okay? Is it not this? Sí. Okay. How can I begin with this theme, cultural landscape? We afford wasteland. We afford new wasteland still today. Perhaps we could speak about what cultural landscape might mean in the future. Today, it can practically only mean to live in a certain space without interfering with its basic structure, without destroying or dissipating it. It means not to afford wasteland. At present, cultural landscape is the vision of an anti-world onto which the positive aspects of future can be projected. Cultural landscape, thus, is the conciliation of technical exploitation with the idea of nature. Landscape, as a term, always expresses a very advanced civilization. Consequently, it forms in phases of development in which daily survival is secured and during which deeper thoughts and future projections on the space of living can be realized. In this process, the space in question usually grows. The interrelations grow more complex. The margins for change, however, become narrower and the decisions more political. The vision of landscape thus always has relations to current defects. As a result, archetypical imaginations of landscape have been evolving in the course of human development, such as the model of paradise, the perfect oasis. During famines, they were more like the land of plenty, with their flowers and pet birds more dedicated to pleasure. One time, paradise is the land where milk and honey flow, and another time the land where one can live without sins and can take from the tree of knowledge, or live in Arcadia in absolute freedom. A concrete picture of such a garden is the Garden Gethsemane in Jerusalem, which is older than 2,000 years. Nowadays, we already speak about paradises if basic needs are satisfied, such as clean water, such as clean air or clean food, or simply spaces which are open without restraints. The problem of the new type of amusement landscape, such as Disneyland, is not the kitsch of its appearance. It is the distraction from the original goal to understand cultural landscape as a vision of the rehabilitation and livable spaces, or to understand cultural landscape as a vision to restore livable spaces, to understand that Earth is getting narrow, that we have to protect her and to treat her like a garden or Noah's Ark. I would like to restrict the following examples to projects of conversion, to projects of reusing industrial areas and obsolete infrastructure, which after rational assessment compel a new imagination of space and structure. In fact, we cannot afford to not convert the wasted and polluted bad places into new paradises. We cannot afford new wastelands, yet we do it nevertheless. We afford indeed new wastelands. The model of an anti-world does not stay theoretical, but turns into a practical assignment. Old, contaminated industrial areas, stressing motorways, and landfills are starting points for new, real, intact anti-worlds. These areas shall not deny their character and origin. A landfill stays a landfill, a mine stays a mine, former industry stays industry, and a road remains a road. But they transform their character and constitute the new cultural landscape. Elements which stood before for damage and pollution turn into symbols of renewal. Please now allow another thought. I appreciate the achievements of modernism, but I decline its confrontation of technology and nature, which culminated in Frank Lloyd Wright's aesthetic concept of falling water. Cultural landscapes have to implement rationally and pragmatically specific tasks, that is, to follow an ecological concept, which nowadays we call sustainability. This means also participation. It does not work with so-called ecological design. Ecology is not a design language. Design languages are open, but ecological requirements have to be fulfilled within this project, whatever design may be chosen. After all, it should be a matter of course not to deal in the first instance with near-natural production areas. Instead, we have to care about those spaces becoming more important as living space, and this already in the last 200 years. It is an urbanized world where, because of its density, it will be much more difficult to realize visions of landscape. The oasis, as a mini spot of an intact island, rises about itself. As a philosophy, it seizes the future of the urbanized world where the coincidence nature must have its place. The examples I want to show are, that's one. The Europe town of Kirchberg in Luxembourg, the Parco d'Ora in Torino, the Old Harbor in Bremerhaven, the landfill Riria in Tel Aviv, and I will come to the end with a view back on the landscape park Duisburg. I will touch upon a typical aspect in these examples, water management, and thus simplify, the higher complexity for today. Here, the dealing with water and climatic effects is rather playful. The Kirchberg Plateau in Luxembourg is a more rational example in a bigger scale. The former agricultural land has been colonized within the last decades by European institutions. After a period of development in accordance with the principles of functionalism, with oversized traffic systems and isolated office blocks, a fundamental rebuilding of the town was initiated in the 90s. In cooperation with architects, we worked out a master plan to create a viable city of high identity and mixed use of living, working, education, and leisure, shortly a European town. Its most obvious example is the transformation of the motorway into an urban boulevard. Once a road being organized only for the cars, it is now a three-line traffic system for pedestrians, cyclists, cars, and public transport. Important is that people need not to be protected against the road anymore. People stay there, sit there, use it as public space. The last part of the avenue is under construction. It combines the traffic facility with the public open space. A new green connection interlinks the Roman Road Park with the Belvedere on the other side of the boulevard. A long pergola which is built into a steep slope and opens up a wide view into the landscape. The same principle is realized already where the Central Park is turning towards the roads and forms a green quarter together with schools and sport facilities. Parks and avenues belong to a European arboretum that gives the green model of the European town a symbolic identity with a collection of all species of Central European trees and shrubs. Main features in the parks are groves, which will provide a shady canopy, and water. The new urban density requires a specific rainwater management, which should combine the technical issues of retention and drainage with the aesthetic use and pleasure in the park. Water is flowing from large surfaces and roofs into a lake. The quality of the water gets improved by an oxygenation system. The water arrives in open channels and gets circulated by a water curtain and fed into the lake. Part of the system is a subterranean reservoir filled with gravel underneath the higher-lying meadow. Therefore, the water remains cool and clean. Another part of the rainwater retention system is located in a small valley in the city boundary. It combines the technical demands with near-natural construction. Surplus masses of road construction works form dune-like sculptures of earth, and spiral-shaped hollows fill with stormwater. Due to their geometry of a negative acceleration, they come down the water and give it off in a controlled way. The A's contain always water and represent the ecological reserve. The park, with its technical ponds, is a valuable recreation area for a new town quarter. I will now continue with the reclamation of former industrial land. On the site of the future Parco d'Ora in Torino, we have to interpret the existing landscape, the different information layers which form the structure of a landscape. The industry, the river, the infrastructure, visual connection, and so on. As a first layer, we have the scenic connections to the Alps. Then the riverside. As a third layer, the structures of the industrial history. In a first step, we concentrate on the preservation and new interpretation of the existing, which can define the metamorphosis of an industrial area into a park, the sub-constructions of demolished buildings, the cooling tower, the former production halls and the cooling plant, the remains of a concrete cover plate of the river. The subconstruction, with their fascinating concrete patterns, will become water gardens, more or less the outdoor living space for residential buildings, offering a new biotope for water plants and specific fauna. The inside of existing then stripped buildings will be opened, their outer walls enclosing horticonclusi with a special vegetation. Ramps and staircases made of recycled steel will connect the different levels. The walkway crosses the street and continues into the central part of the park. The former cooling tower will be made accessible and kept as a prominent landmark. Within another part of the park, the trees will form to regular patterns of shady growth. They follow the grid of the pillars in the former historic structures. The groves will offer spaces for great variety of activities. Following the ecological task, they will be built only with recycled material. The heavy concrete plate covering the river will be removed. It is one of the first actions to liberate the river from its dark cave. The concrete pillars will remain. In the metamorphosis, this part becomes a technical gorge with wild water rushing between the promenades. The central area with the halls and the spaces around them will be used intensively for sports and play, for exhibitions or different sorts of events. The larger hall will be changed into something we call a futuristic jungle. The construction of the smaller hall with its impressive steel pillars is still in good condition and therefore preserved as a sheltered loggia of the town. Ruinous parts are already removed. You can imagine all sorts of activities and events in this generous public space. Vegetation and public life will move into the former production areas. Here, for instance, one of the stair towers combined with a slide for the amusement of the young. The grid of the pillars, here already overgrown on its way of transformation into the steel jungle, continues with the trunks of flowering trees outside the former hall. You can imagine the red steel columns with the green slowly conquering the artificial environment. We will install an effective drainage system with runoff from buildings feeding cisterns and open drains. The circulation of the water will be operated by solar energy. On the ground level, small channels filled with rainwater run through the new open space. They are part of the rainwater system and the ecological circulation of water in the park, which included also the water gardens and the sub-construction as I have shown before. The towers of the former cooling plant are the main elements of the new rainwater system. They get transformed into water gardens and gardens with special climatic effects, which can be watched from terraces and high-level walkways. Decorative lighting gives prominence to the monuments and the highlights of the water system. The futuristic jungle at daytime and a mysterious world in the night. The old harbor site in Bremerhaven is realized also already in large parts. The old harbor has lost its former significance. The locks were closed, the buildings around the harbor basin were demolished. The town itself is well known for its ship's wharves and for its historic importance as the place where the immigrants left Germany to find a new home in America. The house of the immigrants is part of the conversion of this area. The revitalization of the old harbor aims to reconnect the river Weser and the city center, and to become the core of new residential and recreation areas with public squares and promenades. A marina with boatyard and sports boat lock. A complex structure, both town and landscape, building and open space, harbor and park. In this new town quarter, the open space concept is realized before the construction of the buildings in order to attract investors and especially to offer attractive public areas very early. The planning refers to the existing urban pattern and follows the strategy of a metamorphosis which is based on historic elements. Existing attractions will be combined with new touristic entertainment and cultural facilities, as well as with exhibition and trading zones. Here is the former supply depot of German Lloyd, now a maritime center. The old Bascule Bridge and the historic lighthouse. The concept aims at establishing a strong language of forms for manifold demands, taking into account the rough climatic conditions. One material characterizes the quays, the promenades and squares. Continuous carpets of natural paving stones create quiet and generosity in view of the future heterogeneous build-up areas. Like inlays, particular materials are marking special spots, like the Lloyd Square, which represents the entrance to the harbor. Situated within the axis of an urban road, it forms the center of a sideline from the city to the river and the historic lighthouse. With its wooden materials, the place offers an inviting atmosphere in the rough maritime climate. A special bench with modular design has been developed for the place, being both seat and sculpture. During festivities, a lattice pylon illuminates the deck. The square are zoned by use of material and equipment. Zone paving stones with smooth surfaces cover the main walking areas, whereas the rough surfaces of cobbled zones signal attention and caution for pedestrian traffic. We have no handrails in this project. Also here, the elements of street furniture are specially designed, drainage elements, service units for high voltage power, benches, lamps, and lighting poles with integrated flags. On the western quay, a new wooden bridge is crossing the historic entrance of the former dock, which was preserved in its outlines. The bridge creates a continuous pedestrian connection and represents a new landmark. Spatial impression and visual connections are supported by a differentiated light concept, which emphasizes the historic buildings and gives orientation from far away. Sparsely inserted trees and the street furniture symbolize the change from a pure harbor to a public space. Here at a famous event, the so-called sail, when legendary sail ships are gathering in Bremerhaven all 5 years. With another example, I would like to show the rehabilitation of a landfill, this Hiria in Tel Aviv. From the long distance, Hiria appears as a mystic mountain. This genius loci has been the objective of art, which understood the landfill as an object. Now it turns into a landscape and a planning program. Design approach means that Hiria is growing into details to get a stability which will be secure for the next decades. It is also a big challenge for the engineers. Here's the attraction of methane. Hiria, now consisting of the agricultural plain, of the two narrow riverbeds deeply cut into the plain, of the steeply ascending mountainsides, and of a plateau which is more or less a desert and differentiated in the interior. Something you could call a valley is leading into a very special space in the center of the plateau. For this landscape, we have to find a new language. The existing shape of the mountain, 65 meters high, is unique. We want to preserve this appearance by keeping the steepness. This by having always in mind the requirements of engineering, the enhancement of the slope stability, here with terraces at the toe of the mountain. Our conception refers to a certain sequence. The foot terrace as a counterweight, the wadi, the steep slope, the plateau, the inner oasis with inside terraces. These landscape elements here shown in the competition plan are now the objects of a detailed planning. It was important for both form and security to relocate the existing stream from the toe of the mountain in order not to sodden it and to prevent inflow of unclarified leachate into the water. In the future wadi, streams will meander freely and trees will be arranged in informal patterns. There are also paths crossing the wadi on a higher level and connecting into the next landscape element. The foot terrace is constructed as a counterweight. 6 million of cubic meters of heavy debris will help to stabilize the sensitive toe of the steep slope. The image should give you a vision of the future landscape which is formed by agricultural use. The steep slope keeps its actual fascinating shape. Just like the slope, the plateau is very sensitive to changes of the silhouette. We think that the meager and low vegetation, like garriga, should stay knee-high at the most. In the midst of the hill, with this lower-lying terrain, we would plant higher-growing vegetation. Here and in the deeper-lying oasis, different protection layers will be necessary. Sealing because of the methane emission, which prevents that water can seep into the mountain, a water collection layer, and a layer of vegetation which covers the layer of drainage. At its inside edges, above the sunken area, the plateau will become the highest terrace of the inner herd, of the inside terrace and the sacred garden. The garden is the most important element, forming an autonomous landscape, an oasis which gets a more intensive shape. It will be irrigated with rainwater collected from the large plateau, but also with recycled water coming from the recycling park and the biogas plant, which are built at the eastern foot of the mountain. Therefore, we can imagine green terraces throughout the year in a desert climate. The form of the terraces result from a rather unpleasant situation. The mountain is not stable, the garbage is moving continuously. The supporting dry stone walls are made of the same material like the foot terrace, just debris, which gets remanufactured in the recycling plant. The terraces will offer wide views over the low-lying terrain of the inner oasis, which will have an even denser, even tropical vegetation, this by reason of a special irrigation and retention concept. The drainage layer empties into a water horizon, completely sealed and consisting of recycled gravel. It is covered in a way that 50% of the pore volumes are preserved. Soil and gravel bodies are installed above the gravel reservoir and the ceiling, where plants can grow which have their feet in the water and their heads in the fire. This concept of underground water storage is simulating the system of real oasis. The subterranean reservoir, filled with gravel and water, helps to minimize evaporation and to keep the temperature low in order to preserve the quality of the water. We would also like to get full shade by trees growing around it. Species with different heights are forming a double canopy. Towards the recycling park, which is situated immediately at the eastern foot of the mountain, the slope is secured by a sheet pile wall. A visitor's promenade will be built on top of it with a railing and a filigree pergola added to the rough wall. It will offer views to the visitors' center already open to the public and to the interesting course of events in the recycling park. The object of examination is what is usually hidden elsewhere. At the end of my talk, I would like to give you a view back from the landscape park Duisburg Nord. We learned that industrial ruins are not at all ugly and useless. No, there can be fascinating structures when changing into layers of a landscape. The new vegetation types being created and the contamination of the soil give cause to think in another way about ecological phenomena. I will use the pictures as a background for a more theoretical discourse which accompanied the process of development. This means, on the one hand, the dealing with the existing, and on the other hand, the consideration of nature. Environmental damage and pollution are very likely still to be the first things we associate with mines, steel factories, or landfills. We find the reality to be chaotic. However, knowledge about production could lead one to discover a new aesthetic awareness. It is not necessary to set the chaos in order, but we must make it understandable. The aerial view shows a scattered site cut into fragments of infrastructure lines. In this area, individual park systems operate independently. The top layer is the railway park with its high-level promenade. No. Excuse me. I have problems to find this. And the bottom layer in blue is the deep-level water park. Other systems are the single fields and clumps of vegetation and the promenades in yellow which connect the towns. It was necessary to use a new analytic method to become familiar with the existing patterns and their systematics. We had to learn, for instance, to run according to the movement of a locomotive. Underneath densely growing vegetation, we discovered the large rail hub, once developed as a system of working with gravity. A dozen of tracks in different levels, which can be experienced as mountains and canyons. Now a huge piece of land art has developed, slowly elaborated by gardeners. When working in post-industrial site, it is also essential to create new connotations. Thus a huge machine becomes object of identification or landmark, or mythical and fabulous creatures. Then a blast furnace is not only an old furnace, it is a menacing dragon rising above its surroundings. Now tourists climb over and through the ruins of production, eager for knowledge, to learn how to deal with the objects anew and use them freely according to their own imagination. Spaces are created for new sports that used to be associated with foreign landscapes, such as climbing and diving. The old gasometer was flooded with water and contains a submarine world. Spaces are created for use in a former ore depot. Desolate and rundown spaces become places for public events. We transform new ways of seeing nature and imported plants into a different vegetation management, and we deliberately use the immigrated plants to define new places. All these associated with the cultural term garden, where stillness and beauty one enjoys in contemplation. All this links up with the idea of a landscape in which, instead of mountain tops, the man-made mountain ranges serve as landmarks within the chaotic urban spaces, like the blast furnace and the Cowpass. Conversely, side peaks create an aesthetic and visual control of space which had never seemed possible before. In a civil world, nature was cultivated in contrast with technology. In an ecologically orientated world, nature and technology have to present themselves homogeneously. This is the aim of the water park. Natural water no longer exists on the site. The first zone of saturation is contaminated by polyaromatics. The open wastewater canal was used to carry non-treated sewage. For the new water system, we used the same profiles to avoid contact with polluted ground. We left this profile only here, where we had to cross an existing slag hill. The profile is sealed by a layer of clay, and the wastewater is carried within an underground main. For the new water system, rainwater has to be collected. It flows in open rivulets through the existing overhead pipe systems. It falls into former cooling ponds, becoming enriched by oxygen. The basins were cleaned, and now water lilies and iris bloom in pure water, and fish and dragonflies live in a new biotope. Former settling tanks were cleaned up of arsenic mud that was squeezed out and loaded into old mines. They are now supplied with clean water. The collecting water paths flow into a clean watercourse. Platforms with seats invite visitors, and little islands are colonized by flora and fauna. A spectacular installation was set up in the former mill tower of the sintering plant. We wanted to use the power of the wind for an oxygenation system. Water is pumped up from the canal and falls from several points after having made its way through the gardens. The water channel and the whole system are an artifact which aims to restore natural processes in an environment of devastation. These processes are governed by the rules of ecology, but initiated and maintained by means of technology. The system is at one and the same time natural and artificial. In the planning process, the decoding attempt takes precedence, and the strategy of preserving the layers of information has priority over the rounded picture. The chaotic remains left over from the industrial age are what we have to tackle with care. Even though they have already existed for a while, the remains of production turn from a rational neutrality into a semantic quality due to a new way of seeing. If it is attractive to stage a ballet in front of the remain structures, if it is more fascinating to transfer everyday activities in those post-industrial spaces, then it appears that a new idea of landscape has been called into being, the fantastic landscape that succeeds the industry. Thank you.